You have to take it apart to get it into the room.
I had the frame all in one piece,
But
and I
now
had to cut it into 3 pieces. So
yeah,
I have to take it off and take the frame apart to get it downstairs and reassemble it in the loft.
Reassemble it up the stairs in the loft.
Yeah, yeah. So it's slightly impractical.
It's good that you're handy with tools.
Yeah.
And then that's the next. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next
So that's So those 2 are the main pieces.
That's the one I was thinking a lot of. I think when I wrote the piece, because I knew that one.
Because there's more. Well, that would make sense because there's more.
The animal.
There's more movement in this. There's more
Yeah.
kind of tension and movement and
Yeah.
dynamism in that. Where that's very
symbolic.
Yeah, and it's just also very contemplative. But actually, thinking about it, when I was first discovering painting in my early teens, I was looking a lot at Gauguin, and I just fell in love with Gauguin.
Right.
This reminds me a lot of Gauguin's work.
Yeah.
Because it's figures in kind of contemplation, musicians kind of playing, and it's really kind of soft, kind of melancholy kind of feel. But it's nothing of the colouring of Gauguin.
Because when you first approached me about making a piece for this exhibition, I originally was going to have a flute.
Yeah, right.
Like strings and a flute or something with pan, because it's Pangea.
Yeah.
But then I kind of thought, that might just be a bit obvious.
And it's not really you.
Yeah, and I don't play the flute. But then once I was given that instrument, that Baroque viola, I just started playing it, and the sound of that instrument seems to just be the voice of these paintings.
Well, that makes sense because it's a deeper sound.
It's a deep sound. Yeah. The gut strings.
Yeah.
Like that. You've got the flesh and the guts of them. It's so visceral. That as soon as I started mucking around on that viola, the piece came to me. Tell me about. You call this New Baroque, which is funny because I do Baroque.
Yeah. Well,
it's
it's a term that's being bandied about because there are quite a few painters around the world now
calling it a new hashtag.
Well, going back into the aesthetic of Caravaggio, Rembrandt, Rivera, those kind of painters, and they're really inspired by a few painters who have gone against the grain of the last 100 years. Yeah, like Antonio Lopez and Odd Nerdrum.
So
the guy I studied with last year.
Because it kind of reflects a bit what I'm doing with Baroque. There's this whole culture of people like me who are using Baroque instruments.
Oh yeah.
And what I find is interesting is like there's 2 ways you can go. You can either just get lost in trying to go back into the past, which I don't think is that helpful. People are trying to sound just like it sounded in the 18th century.
Right.
Or you can go like what I'm doing, and I think what you're doing is to say there's something really relevant in what was happening in the 18th century. For us now, in our kind of global predicament. Yeah. So if we can get that and reappropriate that form, but turn it in, but create something new with it. Do you know? That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
That whole idea that this is just old-fashioned stuff. These are old-fashioned instruments. You have to create something new all the time. Actually, I think it's harder, and this is what I was listening to from Zizek. It's harder to go back and find what's important. And then bring it back and make it relevant.
And that's why you find
But it's more important to do that.
And that's why you find in a lot of contemporary classical painting, which this kind of falls under. Yeah. It falls both ways. There are painters actually just dwelling in the aesthetic of the Renaissance. Yeah. And there are painters actually doing something new with that. So like Odd Nerdrum, the Norwegian master, who have been immersed in, and really this is a result of that immersion. Yeah. He's always gone into a narrative that's very relevant but also very timeless. Yeah. So he's not falling back on old myths or like...
Because his work to me looks very modern.
Yeah,
like the symbolism of it's modern.
Yeah, and it's very post-apocalyptic. Yeah, so it syncs quite well with the modern American novel. Yeah. Like, so I think it's quite ironic that he's been deemed like as a throwback, really, by the art world.
Kind of what I'm doing here. That's my interest, is that like, there's a lot of Baroque players don't want anything to do with electronic music.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas for me, this is a whole other instrument that I can use.
Yeah.
And the way I can play it, like I program that so I can make foot pedal sounds or samples, and then combining that with the gut strings. So suddenly, you know, you're taking everything and trying to make something new out of it.
Yeah, and you're seeing that in Oliver Arnold's work.
Yeah, totally.
And Niels Frahn's
work.
loads
of people.
And
So, you know, it's that thing of, I think the interesting thing is going back in the past and then finding what's really important, and then making that into something modern.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah. That's and it's I know for me it's a whole grounding thing as well, because it's going back into something that's very connected to people. That's something people don't actually have to think about too much, but they can really connect emotionally to the piece directly. Yeah, like that was lost. That's been lost a lot in the visual arts. Yeah, and this is the biggest kind of double standard in the arts, right? Because it's not like you don't see that happening as far as I can see in music. Yeah, where you've got like classical music has always been relevant, held in high esteem. True, classical painting has kind of, for some reason, begun to seem really retrograde over the last 100 years. What I've been trying to do is create a modern piece with electronics, but using the form of a Baroque Passacaglia. So the bass line is how the form continues. Yeah, that's why it's called 9 passages, because there's 9 elements where the bass line grounds it again. You know, like you're saying, but the melody line can be very up and down and whatever. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that in terms of this piece. You've got that bass. You've almost got a very relevant bass line. Well, it's almost 9 figures. It's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's actually 9 figures, and it does. The composition works basically in pyramids and in spirals. So you see the spiral starting with the skull, going round and round the figures. But those figures, together with the landform, actually create the rhythm in the piece. Yeah. So there's something synchronous there with the 9. And then my other idea was that was, you know, this transformation of human into the swan. Yeah. And the idea with my sound fragments in the background was to go from like the city. You know, I had a recording I made on an iPhone years ago. Right. An old drunk guy singing in Dublin on the street. Yeah. And to take it all the way back into like the animal sort of nature resonance. Right. So that's what that one did for me, Okay. Anyway, the exhibition's on the 5th of July. 5th in Clonakilty. And I think most people coming are going to recognise themselves naked in the... that's the idea. I'm not in any of them. Yeah. No, the other thing I hear in your piece is because of a lot of the figures in these pieces are basically in a state of contemplation, remembrance, melancholy, whatever. Sure. Yeah. It's like your piece feels to me like the memory resonating inside of these figures. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Like a friend wrote to me this morning and said, they're so alive. Do they speak? Right, yeah. I was like, well, actually they're deep in their own world. Yeah. Like you have to listen very carefully. Yeah, for the resonance. But I think if you listen very carefully, you would hear something of your piece. Yeah, cool. So it's those elements from the city back to nature. And a lot of the new kind of new Baroque painting that's going on is really about that return to nature, return to the natural world as well. And that's really relevant because it's so much softer, it's so much more beautiful, and it's a reawakening of beauty really in the visual arts. That's really powerful now in the world, I think. You know, we face this crisis of confidence. Yeah, and I think things have just reached a certain critical pitch in the culture where it's like it's too much. Things go in cycles, so there's always a return, like a rebound. Yeah. And cool. Yeah. Great.